Good afternoon. The Committee on Committee of the Whole is back in session. Colleagues, we are on Chapter 11, page 103. This first section is the appropriation for retiree supplemental annuity. The amount for the annuity is $8,493,840. The request by the administration was $10 million. This number is from the Guam Retirement Fund. It's the number of retirees that are receiving annuities. That number goes down annually. There are many of your, when we go through so that number goes down as a result of it. So anything else, colleagues, on this section? Any questions on the amount for the? That's a different one. B. Well, A, is there any more questions on A? Again, that's the number from the Guam Retirement Fund of the amount needed to cover the retirees that are currently receiving annuities. I mean, that annuity. B is boilerplate. What 103. C is also boilerplate. D, these are all E, requiring the autonomous agencies to provide their contribution to that. F requires the payment from the autonomous agencies in 2 equal installments. G, these are for the Medicare premiums that we provide the retirees that are on Medicare. That's the amount that was given to us, both in the executive budget and confirmed by Retirement Fund. H is the pension for the governors and lieutenant governors and their spouses. I is the pension for the former judges. J survivor supplemental annuity additions. These are all, again, boilerplate, save for the change of dates. A, B, C, Section 3, disability supplemental annuity additions. Again, this is boilerplate for those who have retired under the disability, except for the date. Anything throughout G here, section 3? Section 4, retiree supplemental annuity. Again, these are all boilerplate. Anything on 4? Five, appropriation for cost of living allowance. The amount remains. Senator Espaldon?
No problem with the amount. I just was wondering, because I've heard it in the community, if there was any consideration given to issuing the COLA in 2 or more payments as opposed to one lump sum. And there have been various mutations of that. Last night, in fact, one guy said, can't we just make it a part of our biweekly checks and all that? And he says it goes a long way toward just paying those little bills. But bottom line, the question is, has there been any consideration given to maybe putting into 2 lump sums as opposed to just 1 lump sum?
I will be honest and transparent. The governor's executive budget did ask for 12 equal installments. I just don't know how many of you know or have retirees. They plan on this amount and they know the date. I tell you, I have been out in the last week in October, and by the hour, they know exactly what time it gets out, and it would make things a lot easier for cash management, and if somebody wishes to do that, I would not be adverse to it. I'm just saying they live for that day, and it's not to go to services on that day, I assure you. They want that.
Okay.
But,
Mr. Chair?
yes.
I move to adopt this section, and I want to thank you also for providing that this one-time payment be made no later than November 1st, 2016. I move to adopt.
Any objection? No objection. Thank you. I'm sure this is of much discussion. Section 6. This is the retiree expense appropriation. Anybody wants to discuss this? We don't know. The question was whether or not this was going to be enough. In a later section, I'll discuss the fact that last year the executive budget request was 24 million. We gave 24, and then, as you saw last week in the news, it's short, and we're taking care of that in a later section. But in this one, we're just asking for this. I mean, again, the amount is uncertain until the contract is signed and the decision is made whether it's exclusive or if it's choice, and what the splits are going to be. We really don't know what the total premium is going to be. Like last year when we thought that it was 24 and it comes out to 34, 37. That unfortunately is just the nature of the beast. Yes, Senator Torres.
Then the question that I would have is if we make an appropriation of 24 million, how do we prevent the occurrence of an actual expense after the fact of 30% more than what was appropriated in the budget? Because if in fact they're now saying, based on the news, that they've exceeded the appropriation for this year's budget by about $10 million, right, approximately? That's not 30%, but it's material. And so my question is, how do we, ahead of the fact, prevent an over expenditure of the funds? Because now we're going to have to address the deficit or the overspending or the amount that's due.
Until this year, they have managed to cover that account, whatever the difference has been, utilizing the argument that there's a contract that has been signed and that they have to pay the contract. And this year, fortunately or unfortunately, according to what the Director of Administration stated to the press last week, she didn't find sufficient authorization on the books, and so she has not done it. In prior years, there was supposed to have been reference to an Attorney General opinion that allowed for such expenditure because of the contract. It seems no one's been able to find the AG opinion, and even in the audits, the audit makes reference to it being covered after the fact, and supposedly makes reference to a letter which now can't be found or isn't sufficient. So I mean, this last year wasn't so bad. In 2015, the overexpenditure was 19 million.
But I think what I would like to request of the body then is if we get to that section, or perhaps it's in a subsequent measure, if we can address the method by which we can prevent such a situation from occurring. And I want to just refer to other situations within the government where if we have a fixed budget for a project, even if we go out to bid, if the responses are in excess of that, they don't get awarded. I mean, there's no such thing as spending beyond what is appropriated, or there shouldn't be a scenario like that if we can avoid it. So I would proffer that we have to address this if we know that it's a recurring problem. And if it's preventable by any measure by this body, then I believe we need to address it now before we run into another scenario where we could incur a deficit with this insurance premium of another $10 million on top of what they've already done.
If we're going to address it, probably should be addressed here, if it was going to be addressed, because this is for next year's. In a later section, we're giving authorization for transfer for the governor to cover the expenses for this year. And so in trying to balance this budget, the committee is recommending that we appropriate outright $24 million. We provide another $5 million from the Section 2718, which is the Obamacare. Well, we don't call it that here, but the rebate for participating contract. And in the event that it's more than that, we give the governor transfer authority of an additional $5 million. We really don't know how much the contract's going to be. We only have that problem here in the retiree one. The GovGuam employees are all they're current because we know how much that's going to be. If somebody has an idea on how to be able to address this, I would surely like to. I would not be averse to hearing it. Please. I saw Senator McCready's hand. Did you have? Were you? Or Senator Espaldon?
Well, it was more in line with, again, the lines 13 through 16. And bottom line, we're giving the governor transfer authority up to $5 million from the general fund appropriations. And I guess the question in my mind comes out to that if this is a status quo type of a budget, what object categories have $5 million in them in which you can transfer to this appropriation? Or is that just kind of like putting it on their shoulders and saying, hey, we might be short $5 million and you guys got to find it? Is that how that works? I just don't know. I need to understand this.
2 years ago, they managed to transfer 19. And last year, also transferred some money without any authority, or at least nothing that we've provided. So they can make the payments if they want to, I suppose. And they used to claim that there was a AG opinion to the effect that this contract has to be met. And with health insurance being out there, and all of us retirees depending on it, I'm sure they don't want to cut off the insurance for the retirees, and so something is done. And it will all depend on how the negotiations go and what kind of a deal they manage to cut for this year, and how much it's going to cost. And so not knowing how much, we gave 30 and said, if it's going to be more than that, then we'll give you an additional 5 in transfer authority from whatever excesses you believe that you're going to get. And if for some reason the $55 million that they claim they're going to get does happen, they would have no problem being able to find this $5 million to transfer. If it comes in. Yeah.
But even if it comes in, they would still need legislative authority.
The $5 million is here for them for whatever funds that they have. They have authority to transfer an additional $5 million to pay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Bloss. I'm sorry, Senator McCready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of on the same thought process of the previous speaker, where it looks to me as if all the work we have done for the budget, and then we get to this part, and this is the part that could be the deal breaker, because it doesn't seem like this $5 million is funded. It's almost as if you're just telling the governor, find the money whenever you find it, or however you find it, or whoever you find it from. So it's almost a $10 million shortfall. And if we know that we have a $60 million conservative cut of the budget, and I know you asked for any ideas, a possible idea would be to put $10 million back into that to reflect that this would be paid. rather than asking the governor to find the money somehow, somewhere, if it comes in. Because at the end of the day, the $5 million or the $10 million debt that we have is still going to be on the backs of the insured, of the person. So it doesn't matter if we agree or he doesn't agree, and vice versa. At the end of the day, the loss is to the person who is insured. So I think that, and I'm not sure how we would do this, but I think what the previous speaker said was correct, that this $5 million is unfunded, and we're giving him an appropriation on a conservative budget that we're cutting $60 million off from the top. And then we're asking him to find the money. There is no money. And then we're saying that if we collect it, they come back here and they get the appropriations. But we know already that there's probably, it's going to cost more than $24,859,483.
It doesn't necessarily have to.
But we have, in the negotiating room, Mr. Chair, we have a legislative branch, a retiree branch, we have an executive branch, so we have every branch covered. So it's not as if they're doing it by themselves.
I haven't seen what happened this year, but I have seen the memos for the last 2 years. And the memos for the last 2 years have had a provision in it where it informed the executive who was making the decision on what to choose that going exclusive would have saved almost $19 million 1 year and would have saved over $10 million this last year. So the decision on whether or not you go exclusive or choice is theirs. The committee comes in with the recommendation with all of it.
But Mr. Chair, aren't we the ones, the legislature a couple years ago, who made the mandate to give the options? We passed the law to give the options. It was originally
we gave him the authority to make the determination of the option.
Okay.
Choice is not a fundamental right.
Okay. But we passed the bill in here to give options.
Yeah, to give options.
Originally, the bill that we passed in here was to be a sole provider. And then we switched it and we made it an option provider. So, and to my recollection, I guess you would say, of the people who stayed and left the sole provider wasn't a huge number. But the total sum of the cost of the insurance is now $10 million more than we anticipated. Like you said, 19 million was the deficit before, now it's about 10 million. It's still a deficit. So we still, no matter what happens, I guess they're going through the negotiations as we speak. But at the end of the day, who is it going to hurt if there's a deficit? Who is it going to hurt if the governor doesn't have the $5 million to transfer? It's going to hurt the person that's insured. So shouldn't we as a body, we know what's going to happen. We know that this $5 or $10 million is not going to be readily available for the governor. Shouldn't we just make sure that all the hard work that we've been doing, and yourself and your staff for this budget, that this one portion is not the deal breaker that keeps us here to October 1st? And if we don't have a budget by October 1st and the governor looks back and says, well, a rollover budget looks a lot better than this one because of this one section, shouldn't we find a solution now? There has to be a solution, Mr. Chair.
I agree, and probably with the tight finances, the solution is exclusive. Though we have given the authority to choose between exclusive and choice, that now with being in this corner, that this year might be the year that you need to go exclusive because that would be less than having choice.
That is an option, Mr. Chair, but playing devil's advocate, you can also say another solution would be to give back 10 million of that 60 million and cut $50 million off the budget.
Where would that budget.
Well, if revenues are tracking from last year to this year, if they're tracking, and obviously the tangible asset would be BBMR sending the letter down here, or the evidence that their budget projections are tracking. The last I heard it was 97% tracking. You would be able to make an educated decision on saying that cutting $10 million or giving back $10 million of the $50 million budget to make sure that this whole budget process that we've been participating in is for nothing, because we know this could be the deal breaker. I mean, if they're tracking, Mr. Chair, I'm not saying if they're 50% tracking, this is 97% tracking.
Tracking of what?
Of
Tracking
their projected budget, of the budget from last year.
Yeah, and that one, I got slammed for reducing it by 40. And we're not even going to make that. I already apologized to you guys a half dozen times in this session for talking you into an 8.5% increase in the BPT, when BPT should have only been increased 4%. And that's what we're realizing.
I'm just advocating that there is more than one solution, and one of those solutions would be to cut $50 million off the budget and put $10 million into here so it's funded. That's an option.
But where is that money going to come from?
At some point, we're going to have to trust but verify the fact that the projections will pan out of the executive branch. I mean, because if it does not pan out, then this $5 million is unfunded. If the $55 million that you were just talking about to the previous speaker does not come in, this $5 million does not get paid out, so it's an unfunded mandate. So it works both ways. Either we are going to unfund it knowingly, or we're going to find a solution now. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Blas? No. Anybody else? Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have any update on, I know there was conversation, there was an effort to move retirees over to Medicare.
There was the RSP. I guess it's called that RSP. And we tried to move that last year, and a couple of hundred employees did move over there. That's part of the $2 million that we provided earlier for Medicare premiums and payments. And there are issues with that because some retirees, and I don't need to, you probably know them as well as I do, a number of retirees have taken on the responsibility of being the guardian or adopting their grandchildren, and so consequently they can't be on and some of them have married younger and both of them aren't on Medicare, so consequently can't do that one.
So
I mean, I went to all the presentations last year, and
for intents and purposes, that window to move them over is closed?
If we could move more people over, yes, it would make the retiree insurance less expensive.
Okay. But so my question is, does that process no longer exist with that opportunity for them? Is that closed? Is that
no? That's continuously open.
Okay, so there is a possibility that
it is available.
Okay.
And it's just convincing people that would be the better thing for them to do.
Okay, thank you.
And I think you know as well as I do that a lot of people don't like change, and they're happy. They don't want to change their doctor, they don't want to change their nothing. Don't move any furniture in the house.
So I think along those lines, and that would help to alleviate some of that concern with regards to that $5 million and whether or not this will be enough.
Now, a couple of years ago, I went to a meeting in Lexington, Kentucky, and I came back, raring to go to require that after the 64th birthday retirement fund, at least in Kentucky, after your 64th birthday, they call you and for the next 12 months walk you through all the process of how to get onto Medicare, so that by the 3 months before your birthday, you have fulfilled all of the requirements to move and to take you off.
I'm just trying to find ways to.
No, I agree, and that's why that proposal was made in the negotiations, in the hopes of trying to move people over. But unfortunately, we can't prohibit people from taking guardianship or adopting some of their grandchildren.
Okay.
Which then precludes them from being on that one. But
it's understandable. Thank you.
The other thing that might help was if the contract would be signed sooner and there would be a longer period between the signing of the contract and the open enrollment would be a longer time, so that people could be walked through the system and to understand that. Unfortunately, with a very short open enrollment period, some of us don't even want to consider any kind of change for fear that it would mess up what we already have. And it happens with age. We become fiscally conservative and unwilling to change. Any other comments on this section, on how this is going to be done? Any objections? Section 7 is the T's and lease appropriations, and those are all broken down for you in various segments of what the T's and lease is costing. And so anybody have any questions on the amounts and the reasons for which they are there? Madam Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, I know that we heard about new offices and also warehouses, but then go back to H and it says a lot for new GOD office and warehouse 2, and they have a new GOD warehouse 2 already and an office. Is this something that's very new and is something that hasn't yet been built and will be built, so we're appropriating these monies in advance?
No, well, I'll let the former superintendent speak to that, but I think it's all there. That was in the lease. All of these parts are in the lease. The only thing that we did in OFB was to break it out for you so you know how much each one of those sections cost and continuing it. My office has written to the Attorney General's office asking whether or not a non-appropriation for any one of these sections could be done. We received an acknowledged receipt, but we've not gotten a response. So I I don't know whether or not we can not appropriate any one of these amounts, because it's all part and parcel of that one master lease that they have up there for these properties, and each one of the things that.
So we're actually then just leasing, in this particular case, a lot, continuing to lease it without a building.
Yes.
In anticipation that later on they're going to build the building, and then they would now come in with a new request then to pay for the rent and the insurance and maintenance later on, aside from the lease?
Yes. Remember, there was some airport property that they got. There was a license agreement between Cortec and the airport, and that's that whole thing of, we returned it to the original landowner, somehow it's coming back to us, and we're now having to pay for it.
And that particular case, because we've received word that they're unable to proceed with getting the permit for occupancy, because the airport is saying that they're not to provide or supply them the water lines, and that they are to procure this on their own, and they're now asking the department to fund the lines for the water or a tank. So, and I'm wondering whether has that request come in to you?
I haven't seen it. The committee hasn't received that either, and there was no mention of it at the public hearing. I mean, last year's public hearing, I chided the superintendent that they were building new office spaces when there's plenty of space throughout vacant, but it was just chiding with they'd already made the decision that they were going to get themselves new office spaces, and they're actually even going to raise a building for some additional space to have other things that they're putting up there, with a perfectly good office building. But I just wanted all of you to understand how much each component of this thing is costing. I believe the total it's now up to 10 million, 10.1 million. Yes, and with the entire Pt.2 operation, and with the new school, it's the office being an additional $2.8 million it's costing us. Yeah, Senator Underwood.
And there was actually quite a bit of conversation between me and the superintendent regarding that. But my understanding, Mr. Chairman, was that the way it was proposed to the Department of Education was that if they were not going to utilize it, other agencies were going to be utilizing that, and the governor's office was going to lease it anyways for another agency or other uses. So that was how that was explained to me. But what this does with the Pt.2 lease is, I can agree that the new building could have been better used or could have been exchanged for a classroom or new classrooms. But what they've tried to do is to consolidate the warehouses and the central offices there along with Pt.2 High School. So it has grown to be astronomical, as we have discovered, but at the end of the day, that was the agreement that had occurred between the governor and the superintendent, who had wanted to take advantage of that. Otherwise, it would have been, my understanding, other agencies who would have occupied that.
Okay. Anyone wish to add anything on this section or to add to the conversation? Senator Blas? Okay, so then section 7, Pt.2. There's no amendments to it? Yes, Senator St. Nicholas.
On Section 7, Mr. Chair, just a little perspective here. For the Teton High School Gymnasium, we have a cost, I'm sorry, that's subsection D.
Yes.
We have a cost of $473,026. And how many instructional days do we have in a GDOE? 180 instructional days. So just to do some quick math here, you take 473,026 divided by 180. And so we're paying a daily rate for that gym of $2,627 a day.
Plus the insurance on the bottom line.
Well, yeah, I didn't add the insurance in. So, I mean, there's just, these are things for us to really factor in, for us to be paying for a gym at a day rate of $2,627, not inclusive. Let me add the insurance, just so I can give us a real clean number. We have 473,026 plus 103,192 for a total of $576,218 a year to lease this gym for the school, divided by 180 instructional days. We're paying $3,201 a day per school day for this gym. Do we have an idea of how many students we have at Ukuru? I'm sorry, at Teton?
700.
700 students divided by 700 students is a cost of $4.50 per student per day. So if they were to pay a day rate, they'd be charged almost $5 a day to use that gym, assuming every single one of those students was utilizing it. Just perspective on the numbers, Mr. Chairman.
No, I understand, and that was the reason why I wrote to the AG asking whether or not we needed to, if there was a way that we could terminate the lease by not funding it, and I've not gotten a response, and so I've included this in the...
To my understanding, the reason why municipal leases do not count towards our debt ceiling is because the funding authorization for those municipal leases are always subject to a year-over-year appropriation. So because they're not locked in for the life of the obligation, that's why they're not having to be factored into the debt ceiling of the government of Guam. Because technically speaking, this body can just choose to not appropriate for it. And that would not, and that's the nature of the financing arrangement. That's what keeps it from being considered debt.
I understand, but the reality is if we don't make the payments, there are 700 students that we have to find someplace for them to be at.
For a gym, for the gym.
Well, no, I mean for the entire, yeah.
Because since all of these are itemized, you know, is it cheaper for us to rent air-conditioned buses and take them up to the next nearest gym every day? You know, those are just different cost scenarios for us to really interpret. But for us to be spending, you know, $3,000 a day per instructional day, I mean, that, I really hope that the gym is, you know, sparkling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So for the Teton lease, it's $4,170,155 for the high school. For the GDOE office building, it's $282,361, plus the insurance, about $350. For the first warehouse, it's $105. I'm just repeating what is on the lease. I'm just, if somebody wants to do something, I'm just, anything on A, B, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, some of the comments mentioned by the previous speaker is certainly right on point in terms of looking at this as an operational expense rather than as a long-term obligation. But certainly this is an arrangement that perhaps we can realize some long-term savings in terms of the overall output of resources coming from our government. But the one question I have, Mr. Chairman, I know you itemize all the different components, and then you have portions set aside for insurance and maintenance. So is this one insurance company that they've entered into to insure these respective buildings, or are we looking at several insurance policies being provided for each facility? Because if that's the case, then really that's not, at least from my perspective, that's not maximizing the expenditures of our funds. Now, if it's one whole policy for the entire facility in Tizen, and then these are the itemized expenses in terms of the maintenance as well as insurance, then I think that is the proper approach. So are you aware of?
I'm embarrassed to admit that that's one of the few things I have not forwarded in government yet.
Okay, it's just an issue that we can look at too down the road. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you for the idea. Unless anybody beats me to it, I will ask. But this doesn't even go through government procurement because this is being procured by the lessor.
But then, Mr. Chairman, that brings into question about all our other government facilities. Because
Yes,
so this is a requirement by the lease? Or the lease-to-own arrangement? Because if, in fact, let's say, for example, MU Lahad or Simon Sanchez or some of these other school facilities, do we have the insurance and insurance policy taken out for that? Or I'm under the impression it's the government of Guam
that's all part of the lease.
No, but the government of Guam incurs the obligation of covering insurance should the facility get damaged during the course of a natural disaster or any incident. So I guess my question here is, why are we paying insurance for these facilities unless it's a requirement by the lessor as part of the lease-to-own arrangement?
That is the contract that we received.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in light of this whole conversation, just an inquiry. We do have other municipal leases for other school facilities. Shouldn't they all be an itemized appropriation as well?
I believe that they are.
For under the same section?
Under the debt service.
Yeah, we've categorized that as debt service, but I mean the reality is that those financings are not. They're actually not categorized as official public debt. They're categorized, and if they are, they have to be added to our debt ceiling. If they're not added to our debt ceiling, then they are technically still municipal leases that should be appropriated. Specific to the lease. So for example, Ukudu, JFK, similar to Teeds, and they should probably all have an appropriation section.
Under I on page 8, that's where for Ukudu, and B is JFK. I did not break that down. That's from the dead abstract that I just included. It's just the way that the dead abstract sent it to me.
Okay, and then just out of curiosity, if we aren't itemizing them out as appropriations, do we run the risk of them being misclassified as a debt obligation versus an actual municipal lease that's subject to annual appropriation? Because, for example, under I, the certificates of participation for Ukudu expansion.
Yes.
That's the Ukudu expansion, but what about the actual Ukudu financing, the original Ukudu financing? Is that also covered under I?
The initial cost was compact impact. The extension is this.
So we converted a municipal lease into official public debt.
By the way that we went out to get the money for it, yes.
Okay. So previously the lease was not factored to our debt ceiling, but now this is official public debt. So what about for JFK? Is that also was that also financed into a bond?
It's
That's
called a
B.
certificate of participation.
Right.
But we're making the annual payments on it, so we listed it as per the GITA debt abstract.
Like, so for example, under I, we have the Ukudu expansion as a certificate of participation, but it's also inclusive of the limit obligation refinancing the Section 30 bonds.
Yeah, that's that brand new bond that we just floated this last month.
So the certificates of participation are still are separate from the actual are separate from the bond.
I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that one specifically. I'm just saying in the first part of the budget bill, this is from the debt abstract, and I just listed those. The T's and lease was not within that. It was completely separate, and that's why it's back here.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because I'm just trying to figure out, because if these are all municipal, categorized as municipal leases, they should all be individual appropriations similar to TISN, because they're subject to annual appropriation. And then at any time this body chooses not to appropriate for those leases, they're considered no longer funded.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I'm just saying I took the first few pages of this from the debt abstract. This one was from a lease that was provided to us. And I guess in the next one we can float that to see whether or not we have to break all of those out and make a decision on whether or not we're going to fund it or not. I've broken this down so you can look at it as miscellaneous appropriations for each one of these different functions, and what happens if we don't fund any of it, I suppose, is we'll find out if anybody makes a move to not fund any or all of the above.
Okay. So then I guess just as an inquiry then to the committee, if we can find out if those other leases should be broken out and if we can break them out in the future. And just also a point of concern, does not breaking them out in this budget act cause us to categorize it differently from a municipal lease versus are we technically officially making it something other than a municipal lease by not breaking it out that way? Just an inquiry to the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
C, the warehouse, 79,000 plus 2,305. $23,102. Teason High School Gymnasium, 473 plus 103. The new DOE office building, $2,344,513 plus 406 in insurance. Whew. 496,000. Oh. GDOE warehouse number 2, 134 plus 38,000. Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And relative to all of these sections here, are we leasing all of these from the same company?
Correct.
Now, my concern here is the individualized insurance and maintenance costs. And I don't know if it may make more practical sense if, in fact, first off, I question, we're renting the facility, yet we have to provide our own insurance and maintenance costs? Maintenance?
I believe that was a question that was
And then,
raised earlier by one of the other colleagues. I'm just saying, I'm only reporting it
Understood.
as what.
so along those
It's a
lines-
combination, it shouldn't, I was wrong in saying it's just insurance. It's insurance plus maintenance.
Okay. Along those lines, and I don't know, is there a way that we can take the insurance and maintenance costs for each of these sections and basically combine it and say up to this amount will be paid for insurance and maintenance of these structures?
I suppose we could, but this is a completed lease agreement that has already been signed.
Yeah, understood.
And I'm just reporting it.
Yeah, understood. But if we can take those combined figures for the insurance and the maintenance, recognizing the lease on it, the rent on it is probably a fixed amount. But if we can combine the insurance and the maintenance and somehow authorize them to be able to go out and look, and as far as combining and looking for a policy and a maintenance contracts, that can give you a better value for the buck, that we could probably save. My suggestion is then to take those figures, don't change those figures, take those figures and say up to this amount, this is what you can have for maintenance and for maintenance and rent, insurance. There's just a suggestion to help to reduce some of this cost. Again, like I said, recognizing that the lease cost itself is probably the only thing there that we have to keep constant. Everything else is negotiable. So my suggestion.
And were it not a completed lease agreement, and we were telling them how much they could lease up to and how much they could, as a maintenance cost, be, I suppose we could. I'm just saying, this
So
is
the maintenance cost a part of the agreement?
yes. Maintenance and insurance.
So that's all part of that agreement, is the
Did I see your hand go up again, Senator Nicholas? Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little bit more perspective on the numbers here, and the reason why I think we need to investigate not only this further, but whether or not municipal leases, in my opinion, they could be amended downwards by this body, and there's no consequence. That's the nature of a municipal lease. But just to put some numbers into perspective, subsection A, the ratio of insurance and maintenance to facility is 20%. For item B, the ratio is 25%. For item C, it's 29%. A warehouse has a higher insurance ratio and maintenance ratio than the school at 29%. The gym, which I would think would have a higher maintenance cost, 21%. The GDOE office buildings, 21%. Warehouse 2 is 28%. Warehouse 1 mezzanine, 28%. And 23% for T-Zone 3 building and facilities. So, there's the ratio of insurance and maintenance costs to actual lease of the facility. There's almost no uniformity here, and that needs to be explained at some point in time. And another point I wanted to bring up was on item H. I'm a little concerned that we have itemized here $44,666 for a lot lot for new GDOE office and warehouse 2, but isn't new GDOE office item E and warehouse 2 item F? And shouldn't the lot be inclusive of the amounts in items E and F? I don't understand why we're breaking out the lot. Parking lot. $44,000 for the parking lot. That's not included in the lease of the facility. Yeah, no, there's...
Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I know that you do have some details in regards to this lease-to-own arrangement. What's the percentage, the annualized percentage that the people of Guam are paying for this arrangement? Is it 7%? Is it 4%? The escalating interest, or the annualized interest that's paid on the outstanding principal that's due, and then over the course of the lease arrangement. Because I recall very distinctly, Mr. Chairman, that a few years ago it was in the range of $7 or $8 million. Now it's escalated to $10.1 million. So that tells me that in a matter of 2 years, it's gone from that figure up to 10.1. So what is the investment interest rate that the people of Guam are paying on this amount, this lease?
I think it may be as high as 10.1%. I mean 6%. 6%.
And it's an arrangement that expands 30 years? Is that what we're looking at? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The new offices increased everything. Okay. And we've mentioned the warehouse 2 at 134,000 plus 38 for maintenance, 52 for warehouse 1, and the mezzanine 52 plus 15,000, and then for the lot by itself, as has been mentioned, is 45,000 a year. And T-DSN 3 building and facilities, just to make it clear, that for right now is GACS. Okay. Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Because you have it broken down into insurance and maintenance, what is the maintenance cost component?
Of which?
Of all of this consolidated, because right now we're looking at $2.1 million approximately for insurance and maintenance
Cost of all these.
for all of these facilities up at T-DSN. My question is, do we invest $2.1 million in maintenance for our other schools, or even one of our other high schools, GW or Simon Sanchez? Because if that's the case, then we need this $2.1 million, unless it's a combination of the insurance cost and the cost of maintenance. And then my question would be, do we know the separate amounts allocated for each of these facilities? Because if it's more cost effective that we allow the in-house DOE maintenance to be able to partner with this school facility and these buildings and maintain it and save the department a little bit of money, which can be allocated elsewhere so that they can retain those funds, then perhaps that's a consideration. But I was wondering if by any chance you know if this is just a maintenance cost, because all-inclusive it's approximately $2.1 million out of the 10.1. And that, I think, is a large sum that's allocated for maintenance.
The document that was given to us on the lease does not break down the amount for maintenance separate from the insurance. It just says insurance and maintenance cost for each one of the separate facilities, say for the lot.
But wouldn't the lessor be able to provide that information subsequent to this discussion?
I suppose I could ask DOE to ask for that breakdown.
If you can, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay.
Just real quick, Mr. Chairman, for the record, who negotiated this lease on behalf of the people of Guam?
This was all done by Adelup, both the previous administration and this administration. The initial lease was the last administration, the continuation and the changes were this. Okay. Section 7, any more questions on or comments on TZIN? And Section 8 was the amount requested by the municipal MCOG, the Mayor's Council of Guam, for the lump sum for all of their employees. Comments? None? Okay. Chapter 12. You had a question? Under miscellaneous appropriations and miscellaneous provisions. Okay, so then we're adding an 8, I mean a 9?
We would add 9, section 9.
Oh, hold on, it's not been copied.
Yeah.
We'll take a short recess and get the... Anybody else have anything that they want to add to the end of the miscellaneous appropriation section? Senator... We already gave the appropriation, right? Miscellaneous provisions. In the provision section, at the end of the provisions. It's not an appropriation since you already got your appropriation. Okay? And I believe you had one that you wanted to put in provisions also. I mean, in provisions, not the appropriation. Okay, at the end of chapter 12, both of you can add new sections. We're at the end of Chapter 11 on miscellaneous appropriations, and there is an amendment being proffered by Senator Narissa Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to add Section 9 on page 112. It's the authorization for the appropriation of the Office of Senator Narissa Underwood's lapse funds for reappropriation to the Guam Department of Education.
Okay.
It reads, Senator Narissa Underwood is authorized to de-appropriate lapse funds from her office budget and reappropriate to the Guam Department of Education for instructional supplies, materials, and equipment. The administrative procedures for this process shall be developed by the Department of Administration in collaboration with the Chief Fiscal Officer of the Guam Legislature. The request for de-appropriation of any prior year's lapse funds must be made within 60 days after the end of the fiscal year 2016, and the reappropriation and deposit must be completed within 14 days of their request.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? No objection? Chapter 12, miscellaneous provisions. Retirement option for GovGuam employees. These are boilerplate. Temporary employment of retired corrections officers. Section 3, temporary employment of retired Guam police officers. Section 4, temporary employment of retired Guam firefighters. Six, temporary employment of retired Department of Revenue and Taxation employees. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, 5, I'm sorry. 5, customs and quarantine officers. 6, rev and tax employees. Section 7, health insurance. Eight, locum tenens exemption during absence of chief medical examiner. We've been doing this just in case there's only one. 9, advance payment for medical services. 10, transfer of employees. 'It's boilerplate, yeah. We've been using it. 11, restrictions on hiring of unclassified employees. Anyone? Senator Respicio.
Mr. Chair, I have a series of miscellaneous provision amendments. We all received the letter from the Attorney General, and I made copies, and it's stapled. On Section 11, to add a new O to include the victim advocates within the Office of the Attorney General. Right now, these individuals, as I'm told, are on a contract, and she'd like to move them into the unclassified service, but she's saying within the upcoming fiscal year that she's going to want to move to make these individuals classified. But this is the best that she can offer at this point, and it's something that I'm certainly willing to support. It's page 121. So it's a new O to add victim advocates within the Office of the Attorney General. Yeah.
Anyone on the victims? Anything else? Anything on section 11 besides the addition of the new O? Section 12. Section 12, boards and commission stipends. Section 13, contracts. This is a boilerplate provision that we've included in previous ones. Section 14, reporting requirements for employment. And then 14, 15, authorization for legal services for the Department of Public Works, Guam Building Code Council, and Contractors License Board, and the Appeals Board. Were you going to make an amendment at this point? I just finished with legal authorization of legal services.
It's a similar language, but I don't know if you want me to put it here or you want me to put it at the end. But
Why don't we go ahead and put it at the end?
at the end,
then?
okay, thank you.
Yes. We'll take a short recess. All right. Section 16, continuing appropriation authorized. It is specific to this bill. This is not a boilerplate. This was for this one, to make sure that continuing appropriations are only what we specifically and explicitly authorize throughout this bill. That otherwise it doesn't roll over. Only in the sections that we actually included a provision for it. Okay? Does anybody have any objection to that? Section 17. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just a reconciliation on the amount. It references 77,951,000 for Section 30 funds in excess of that amount.
Yes.
But for the budget, we've identified 74,900,000. And so I'm curious, is there a reason why we're about 3 million over on that?
It's the 5,500,000 repayment.
Mm-hmm.
No?
No, because if we less that out, that's still 70.
No. This is for this fiscal year. If we receive any reconciliations between today and September 30th of this year, then that amount goes into the rainy day fund. I'm sure all of you recall in previous budget years, we've discovered that some people know that there's going to be some reconciliation, and all of a sudden there are appropriation bills utilizing money that we didn't realize was going to be received by the government of Guam. And so all we're doing is to say that we want to put that into a rainy day fund, and that amount will be appropriated by the legislature for specific emergencies. And we put together a savings account, which is like a line of credit, so that you can borrow against it, but then it has to be paid back. But this is just to capture what some of us sometimes don't know. And I have FOIA'd at least 3 times this year any correspondence with IRS about how much reconciliation we might be receiving, and have not received a response. And so this was my way of trying to make sure that we have some control over that it doesn't all of a sudden become an appropriation fund for different projects. I think if we can finally put some money into the rainy day fund. I mean, it's embarrassing. I have gone to conferences and other states talk about a rainy day fund, and I say, well, we have it by statute, but we've never put any money in it. I'm trying to figure out a way that we can put some money in it, and I don't know if there's going to be any money in it, but just in case that there is, anything between now and September 30th, I realize that I leave it open, because if it comes after October 1st, I've not taken care of that in this. This is just to try to capture this year's funds, or at least money that's going to be received now, so it doesn't get appropriated for other kinds of things between now and then.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Any objection to this? That was easier. Section 18, creation of new positions in the Office of Public Accountability. Speaker Wampat? The positions in the Office of Public Accountability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yes, an amendment was passed out, and it is the one where it says a handwritten Chapter 12, page 125, line 25. That's the copy that we're working with, and this was being proffered by Senator Espicio and I, and it's to amend that particular section, Section 18, and some of the language that you see that is stricken out, that's not totally only for the OPA, and then additional language which says that the placement of grade and step shall follow the prescribed methodology of DOA and shall be applied for other auditors within the government of Guam. Then the new language on C in the bottom, post-audit, that persons appointed and employed by OPA in the classified position shall be subject to post-audit review by the Civil Service Commission. So that's the language of the amendment to page 125.
This shouldn't be C, there's only two actions.
Yes, right here.
Just make this another paragraph. Doesn't confuse. Because DOA takes two actions, accept, deny, or fail to act. They can't.
Okay. Yes. The only suggestion as it relates to this is the post-audit should be a new paragraph. It's not it shouldn't be a third action. They can only accept or deny, and but we also want them to do a post-audit afterwards, which is a completely separate. But I think, yeah. But that can be a technical.
You're right. So
by
can
the
legal counsel
to take
then
it out
make that-
as another requirement, but not one that DOE has to take,
Okay.
but requires that all of these positions get a post-audit.
All right, so legal counsel then if is aware.
Mr. Chair, is there a timeline on the post-audit? I saw an amendment that the speaker's probably going to move, and there was no timeline. And also, what is the classification of the employee during that period that they're subject to a post-audit?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Is that, did
I
you
can't
move
tell
that
from
amendment
here.
now? Yeah. Yeah, that's the one I was wanting to bring up for purpose of discussion is, I mean, it seems like the post-audit for that hire is open-ended.
And do you want to
And-
put a timeline on it?
What would be 180 days, or it's got to be definitive so that it's not open-ended. And if it's open-ended, then it could mean that after 2 years, for example, civil service comes around to it, they're going to be knocking on that agency's door and say, oh, guess what, I'm still authorized to do a post-audit. And what happens if the employee already passed the probationary period? In the case of classified employees, it would be so difficult to undo anything if the audit resulted in some questions relative to that hiring in the first place. And so I think the probationary period is 180 days, right? So we should confirm when a new hire for classified service, I think it's 180 days that they go through a probationary period, and if 180 days. And so I think you should tie that length of time to the amount of authority civil service will have to conduct a post-audit. And if they don't, because what happens if the employee becomes permanent and they do a post-audit after the employee becomes a permanent classified employee of the government of Guam, I don't know how you would undo that. So, Madam Speaker, are you open to just tightening that up so that it's not open-ended?
Okay, so just so that you can't appoint people to a position, because then it doesn't become classified, it's not a classified position you appoint. So it probably should be persons employed by the OPA in the classified service pursuant to this section shall be subject to a post-audit review by the Civil Service Commission within 180 days of employment. Well, no, I mean, I'm just saying, but legal counsel, clean up that last line. Okay? Okay. Anybody else? Oh,
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, this issue has been coming up in the past, right? About the creation of new positions and also the review and adjustments of all the positions within the OPA. And my question here is that I know we're saying this, we're talking about new positions. So what about the position of the public auditor? It's not a new position, and I remember that study also recommended some adjustments for that position. And so does this now exclude her, never mind who she is, exclude the position from this review process as well?
That's the elected position with a completely different.
Okay. And
I'm not saying anything this year. You guys do whatever you want with it.
No, and so I
I'm
think
tired
just
fighting that fight.
in fairness, that position did not get any review or adjustments made similar to all the other elected positions within the government. So, what I'd like to do, Mr. Speaker, is include that position in this whole review process as well.
Okay, why don't we take a few minutes and you guys figure out how to rewrite this section? All right. We'll take a short recess. in light of the hour, let's keep going. We'll just bookmark this on the Section 19, just so that everybody's clear. This is the additional authorization being given for the $10 million to cover whatever shortfall there is for the current year health insurance. I was informed that there was a need for authorization. And so that's what I'm providing here, authorization to use money. If they are tracking at 97%, then I am sure they have some money. So they should have the cash to be able. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an inquiry here. Because this item is referencing the existing health insurance liability for the retirees, and just referencing that to what we're appropriating for the coming fiscal year, this section here has a $10 million authorization for the current shortfall.
Correct.
But next fiscal year does not reflect a $10 million difference from this fiscal year. So are we going to have a shortfall again this coming fiscal year if the terms remain the same?
That's all that we could find at this point.
And the reason why I'm asking is because how are we committing the people of Guam to a cost that is higher than what we're appropriating?
In this year's, we appropriated this 24.
Right.
Next year, we are appropriating the 24 plus the $5 million from the 27-18 and giving a $5 million transfer authority. This year, we're appropriating 29 plus $5 million. Okay. Any other comment? Section 20 CRER. In this section, we changed it. There was an issue on basis of accounting, and so we made it to cash basis as opposed to projected, or with the exception of Section 30. Okay? Just the reports. Section 21, income tax refund status reporting. Section 22, Senator Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a proposal that's been circulated to all of our colleagues, and I believe you also have a copy, and so does OFB. And it would add a new Section 22 to Chapter 13 to read as follows. Section 22, GPD and DOC overtime reporting requirements. The GPD and DOC shall submit a written report to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guam no later than 20 days after the end of each month in fiscal year 2017, which shall include the amount of overtime owed to each employee at each respective agency by fiscal year in which such overtime was incurred by division by employee name for the previous month. Failure to submit said report no longer than 20 days after the end of each month in fiscal year 2017 shall result in a fine of $250 per missed deadline, either for the Chief of Police or the Director of Department of Corrections, which shall be deposited into the GDOE Interscholastic Sports Program. Mr. Chairman, I want to just say the Chief of Police has been remitting the overtime reports, and I'm sure that you've been able to take a look at them. What we've done in this case is we've included Department of Corrections primarily because of the tracking mechanism. This fiscal year alone, they're projecting to expense up to, if not in excess of $3 million just for overtime. And they are in the process of recruiting 40-plus corrections recruits, and with that, we were assured that that overtime figure would significantly be reduced. So in this particular case, I think it's just prudent reporting just to understand where both agencies are with regards to the overtime expenditures, and certainly ask our colleagues for your consideration. Thank you.
Senator Blas.
Can you, Mr. Chair, can I just ask for a 30-second recess, please?
Do I understand we have an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to be able to move this instead of the end of each month to the end of each quarter. To the end of each
Okay,
quarter.
so that would be on line 3.
Yes, sir. Change month to quarter.
On the entire amendment, say for the number, which should be 23, since we already have a 22? Okay.
For the previous quarter.
On line 6 is the previous quarter,
Just make it everything change to quarter.
everything would be quarter. Okay? Yes. Let me finish this. Any objection to having council change it to make it everything's quarterly? Okay? Thank you. Senator,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a new amendment under miscellaneous provision. It's also in that few sheets that are stapled. And this will add a new subsection D to Title V GCA 6206 to read as follows. Section 6206D, approved settlements shall not be subject to fiscal year limitations on authority of government agencies to make full payments in resolution of a claim. And Title V GCA is the Government's Claims Act. And what the Attorney General is asking us to do is to recognize that approved settlements, and given her experiences with this, if a settlement is not paid prior to the beginning of the ending of the fiscal year, then BBMR classified that as a prior year obligation, and she said that she even wrote a legal opinion saying that that's not to be considered a prior year obligation. And finally, they conceded and they agreed. But to avoid these instances going forward, the proposal here is to add this language into the Government Claims Act to say that approved settlements shall not be subject to fiscal year limitations on authority of government agencies to make full payments in resolution of a claim. That's what I'm offering as an amendment.
any comments? Our only concern is fiscally. How much would that are we talking about?
This is just for any claim. I mean, the whole idea with settlements is to avoid further litigation, and hopefully the end result is to save money. And that's why this language is being proposed, so that if it's not, basically it's the same thing, Mr. Chair. It's just that if the settlement is not paid prior to the end of the fiscal year, BBMR classifies that as a prior year obligation, which prevents the payment of that settlement.
Did the Attorney General give you any examples of things that she wanted to address?
The example she used was that there was a settlement claim that everybody signed off on, including her and the governor, and that when it was the end of the fiscal year, she was told by BBMR that they couldn't process that payment because it was a prior year obligation. It wasn't paid before the fiscal year ended. She had to issue a legal opinion saying that settlements should not be subject to that same procedure. And finally, through the help of Sandra Miller, they were able to get BBMR to exercise some comfort to go ahead and process this. I didn't ask for what settlement claim it is in particular because I think that's irrelevant. What I'm concerned about is that if we're going to be preventing the payments of settlements just because it didn't get paid before the end of the fiscal year, then that's going to further complicate this government's ability to settle these claims so that you avoid litigation.
The reason why I asked what the fiscal consequences would be was I thought, didn't we just recently pass something that any settlement had to come down here for?
Well, this is all under the Government Claims Act, so I'm thinking that this provision is still tied into the whole Title V.
No, I understand,
Yeah.
but we wanted to know what the amounts were.
But this wouldn't supersede any existing statute, Mr. Chair and colleagues. It's just basically saying all settlements done pursuant to Title V, if it's agreed to, and that it just because it's not paid before the end of the fiscal year, do not classify that as a prior year obligation.
Okay, but then those would have to come down for our.
Absolutely, because
And then once we've approved all of it, then
I'm
then
not
it would have
saying
to.
notwithstanding other provision of law.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, on that amendment. Addition, provision.
So just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, so what we're saying then is, let's say, for example, there's a settlement that's approved this fiscal year, and in the course of this fiscal year, the agency had identified the funding to be able to pay that. But when the fiscal year came to an end, let's say there was a deficit, and they weren't able to avail of those funds because they ended up using it for operations. What we're basically saying is that settlement can carry forward until the next fiscal year. But it'll carry forward regardless of whether or not we actually appropriated the funds necessary for us to settle that claim. So for example, let's say that there's $10 million in settlements this year, but the administration doesn't want to pay any settlements, of this fiscal year's cash. They want to do something else with it. They can just put off paying the settlements, and then it'll have to be carried forward into next fiscal year.
So the provision on the legislative approval of settlements is still in effect. There's nothing in here is notwithstanding ours. The approved settlements pursuant to the legislative approval of settlements would still be in effect.
Yeah, and shall not be subject to fiscal year limitations. And in response to Senator Stiglitz's comments, this is all pursuant to the Government Claims Act, so either the payment is made from the Government Claims Fund or it requires a standalone appropriation.
Yeah, it would have to. With some of them,
Yeah.
under the Government Claims Fund, any amount in excess of what's in the Government Claims Fund has to come down for a specific appropriation.
But these claims aren't paid off of the agency's budget. My understanding, it's all Government Claims Fund. This is the Government Claims Act, and this amendment is limited to the Government Claims Act.
Mr. Chair, if I could just get perhaps a little bit of clarification myself. If this is if this falls under the Government Claims Act, there is, first of all, a Government Claims Fund, is there or is there not?
Yes.
And that fund is not dictated by any fiscal year limitations, right? In other words, it continues on to be available to, to pay off any claims regardless of the fiscal year.
Within that limit, and if
Within the
it's
limit.
within excess, you have to come down for an additional appropriation to pay it.
Right. And so if that's the case, then what does this do?
I really could not explain it to you. I'm sorry. It's being proposed by the AG and being.
I gave you the example, colleagues, that the fiscal year limitation is just the date.
Right,
And that's
but if there's
what she did do a legal opinion saying that the settlement claim should not be subject to any fiscal year limitation. But apparently, even with her legal opinion, it still took a lot of convincing in order to pay that claim. So with this language, we're trying to prevent that thing from happening in the future. And there's still, everything else is still intact. There's still 6206, settlement of a claim before action. The Attorney General is subject to the approval of the Governor for settlements of over $15,000 for a claim for damages, for example, to a motor vehicle incurred in an accident involving the motor vehicle of a claimant filed exclusively pursuant to 6105. So it's very prescriptive. The only thing that's not clear is if this settlement claim is not paid prior to the end of the fiscal year, the BVMR, for example, is treating that as a prior year obligation. So we could, but so the law is has more weight than a legal opinion. I think she's asking that this be inserted so that any time there's a settlement claim, that it shall not be subject to fiscal year limitations, and that they should, if they settle it on September 30th and October 1st rolls around, they should still be able to pay it. And that's what this amendment says.
But that's the whole purpose of the Claims Act and the fund itself, right? It's not subject to any kind of fiscal year limitations.
So you've helped me argue that the amendment is harmless. And
well, maybe, because now I have to question and try to figure out why is this necessary, if indeed it's really kind of built into the whole process. I mean, I think we all can understand there is no fiscal year limitations when it comes to settlement of a claim, when it comes to when it comes to any legal settlement. I just don't get it. I don't know why.
And I assure you that the Attorney General shares that same concern and frustration, and this is why this language was developed, so that there'll be no question in anybody's mind that a settlement claim should not be treated as a prior year obligation. I mean, it's one way to remove any potential bureaucracies down the road by doing it this way.
If it had been brought to our attention earlier, maybe we could have.
No, it was. She did submit a letter with all these proposed amendments, and I offered to assist you, Mr. Chair, because she's that you are the oversight chair for the Attorney General, and I offered to assist you to track all these concerns that she has, and so this is one of them.
Anybody else?
Just a second. Just a second to go over the word by word.
Okay. Let's bookmark this, and we can try to call and try to get a better explanation.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, just on that note alone, I would like to have a better explanation, especially with just in terms of the language itself.
I'll try to find the letter. If you can find the cover letter, it might help. I just don't remember the argument as to why this had to be done. Okay?
Yeah, I did present the argument as exactly was communicated to me. So, but you're welcome to talk to the Attorney General herself. But,
yeah, the Attorney General herself is not on island. That's the problem.
No, I don't think she left.
I believe she did, because she was supposed to leave with the...
She sent the deputy instead to that meeting in New York. So,
oh, okay.
But Mr. Chair and colleagues, as I've said, yeah, maybe this is not necessary because we all know that settlements shall not be subject to fiscal year and limitations, but it happened. And so there's language to say it shouldn't be subject to fiscal year limitations on authority of government agencies. She was frustrated that a settlement claim could not be paid immediately, and the whole basis of settling is to avoid any further costly litigation. And so she prepared this amendment, and she submitted this to us weeks ago by way of a letter, and the reason for this is exactly as I'm presenting to it. Someone at BVMR thought that because it wasn't paid within that fiscal year, that it should be treated as a prior year obligation, which has to be go through a different kind of process to get that paid. It took her writing legal opinion, and it took Attorney Sandra Miller concurring with I don't want to say concur with the Attorney General, because she is the chief legal officer, and whatever she says should have weight. So it took the governor's attorney to go to BVMR and say, follow this, because this is a legal opinion and that it's not subject to fiscal year limitations, and it should not be considered a prior year obligation.
Okay, there's at least 3 more amendments. Let's break until tomorrow morning. I see everybody coming in. We've been trying to get through everything. I thought... There's a hearing next door. We'll break until 9 tomorrow morning.